Hey everybody, Alex here, and today we have another demo. I'm going to show you how to create a full mini WMS, basically stock tracking system using Airtable so that you can track your stock levels like a pro. First and foremost, we're going to go through a quick brief overview of how the system works and behaves. Then we're going to go through our database design and how everything's set up. Finally, last but not least, we're gonna take a look at how Make is set up and we'll see how everything works together. So let's get started. Awesome, so let's take a look at how the whole system works. Right here I've got my orders table. I have an order for an iPhone, 10 pieces of each, and all I have to do is take a look at my remaining stock levels right here that come from my stock ledger, where I've added some stock into various shelves. In fact, in one case I've added extra stock here on shelf A twice. Once I've added 8 pieces, then I've added 6, so that makes it a total of 14 iPhones on shelf A. Then I've got another iPhone on shelf B, 4 pieces, and shelf C has got 6 pieces. So that's my stock added in. I have my list of iPhone. Well, I've got my list of items, which is just one iPhone, and then I have my list of locations, which is just my 3 shelves. Finally, I have my items X locations, which basically gives me the count of each combination, basically, of item and shelf, which helps me with my automations later on. We'll discuss that shortly. But yeah, so let's just process this order. Let's say I want to use shelf, I can see here I need to fulfill 10, so I'll just use shelf. I could use shelf A, I could use shelf B and C, so let's just use shelf B, and I'm just going to also use shelf C. Process order. The system now is going to show me that it's processing the automation. Here we go, processing requests. And we can see how that has now utilized it has created stock ledger transactions over here, where I can see clearly that the system has used up 4 out of shelf B, 4 iPhones, and 4 out of shelf C. Essentially, this tells me that right now I have only remaining stock in shelf A. Let's create a new order for fun. iPhone again, and let's say I need 8 this time, and I can see that I only have shelf A to use, so I'll just use shelf A. Process order. And that's it. I can see now that I've got 6 left. So that was the run through of the system. Now let's check out how the database is set up in detail. So we're going to get started with our order line items here. This is just basically my orders as they're coming through. There's one hidden field, which is fetch stock availability. This is an old field that I used to use, but I'm not just, it's just a check mark. There's no need to worry about that. But the fields that are here are very simple. I've got my name, which is just a concat of the date, the item, and the quantity required. So it basically creates a nice little string like this. We have a date of the order. We have the link to items. Then we have the quantity required, just a simple field that basically you can tell the system how much you require. Then we have total remaining stock from item, which is a lookup that we're using slightly later on. Essentially this is telling me how much stock is remaining for that particular item, which is very handy. Then we have use locations. So this basically is a link to locations, so I can tell the system that, hey, I want you to use this location when you're processing the order. This could be automated, but for now I'm choosing to tell the system which shelves I wanted to use stock from. Then we have our trigger to process the order. We have our processing log that just basically gets populated as the system is processing the order, and we know that something's happening. We then have the link to the stock ledger, basically linking this order to the stock ledger, which is really important. You want to make sure that your stock ledger entries always have a link back to either a PO. I mean, I'm not linking anything to POs right now, but this is our SO, our sales order. So yeah, my stock ledger is now linked to my sales. Finally, we have the total allocated, which is a roll up from the stock ledger, the quantity, rolling up the quantity field, and only including the transaction direction field, which is use, and we're just summing up the values of the uses. And then finally we have remaining to allocate, which is quantity required minus total allocated, and that basically means to say that, hey, this is how much I still need to process, because technically you might not be able to process the full stock amount, and you need to process it maybe once or twice. Cool. Next, we have items. Items are super simple. An item is first and foremost, there's just there's an extra iPhone here for some reason, whatever, delete that. Then we have stock ledger, link to stock ledgers so that you can see what stock ledgers have taken place. Then we have a remaining stock, which is a total remaining stock, which is a roll up of the total stock name from stock ledger, and then I'm just using array unique values so that it gives me the array unique values from stock ledger. Next, we have total adds, which basically is a sum up of all the adds that I've ever done to the system for that item within the stock ledger. So this is how many I've ever bought. This is how many I've ever used. Again, same thing, but just use being the transaction direction. Next, we have free stock, which is total adds minus total uses, which gives me the pure total free stock for that product. And then, of course, a link to order line items, which is basically self-explanatory. I'm just linking items to orders. Next, we have locations. So locations it's basically a list of locations: shelf A, shelf B, shelf C. They are linked naturally to the stock ledger. Every single time there's a transaction, either a use or an add, you have to tell me which location we're using. And of course, the link to order line items, and that's where we're saying within the order line item over here that I want to use XYZ location to process this order. I think that's it from order locations. Oh yeah, there's also a record ID in here, which is just the record ID of this record. Did I forget anything here? Yes, there is a hidden. Oh yeah. So again, I'm also using a record ID field here because we're going to use that in the automation later on. Let's check out stock ledger. So here, this is the basic use, like the clean way of looking at the stock ledger. Behind the scenes, let me just open up the no filter view. Let's take a look at this, where all the fields are visible. We have our name, which is again a concatenation of item, transaction direction, quantity, and location. Next, we have our link to the items. Link to items. Then I'm pulling the lookup of the record ID in here as a lookup field. Then because I've seen this in previous projects, sometimes when you're trying to query this particular field like a lookup type. Airtable's API misbehaves, so what I've learned to do is not just do a lookup, but then take that lookup and sanitize it by adding it to a concat, like so. Next, we have location, just a dry link to locations. Then finally, we have kind of the same thing, where we're just sanitizing the location name. Then what we're creating a concat of the item X location. We're doing that because later on I need to be able there's a small automation that runs here, which as soon as there is an item and a location present, it will link this ledger record to this extra table items X locations, because that is exactly what's powering this particular lookup over here, which tells me which location has got how much stock. So that's the use here, and we're gonna see this in action in a split second. Then we have total stock name from items, and what this does, it just brings the total stock name from items X locations. And then we have yet another one of them, location record ID lookups, and the sanitization process over here, as I described earlier. Location record ID basically, and concatenating that lookup. Next, we have the order line item, which is essentially being linked automatically when the order is being processed. Then we have the transaction direction, super important field, only two values, add or use. That's kind of like the reality of stock. You can only add or use stock in and out of specific locations. And then finally, the quantity of that transaction. Finally, last but not least, we have items X locations, which I've already kind of described what it does. We have just a concatenation. Actually, it's not even a concatenation, I've noticed. Okay, so that's just basically a name field for the relationship of the item and the location. Then there's a formula field with an if that basically says that, look, if remaining stock equals 0, then just print nothing. If otherwise, if there is remaining stock, just print the name, then a space, X space, remaining stock, which is exactly the field that I'm actually pulling in my order line items to see how much is remaining. Finally, we have our link to stock ledger, which gets created automatically. We'll showcase that in a second. There you go, stock ledger. And then finally, we have the sum up of adds from the stock ledger. I'm just using the quantity. Then only transaction direction is add, just summing up all these values. Same thing for uses, literally just changing that transaction direction. And finally, a simple formula, adds minus total uses, and that gives you remaining stock. So yeah, that was the rundown of the database. Let's take a look at how the automations are set up. Okay, so let's take a look at how the automations are set up for this particular project. There's two automations. Let's take a look. First of all, we have a fill in missing item X location link. And what this does is essentially in the stock ledger, when the item X location name is not empty and items X location is empty and transaction direction is not empty, then it will trigger the update of that same transaction stock ledger record, like so, with the items and locations field being populated by the item X location name concat. Let's take a look at that in action. It's very straightforward. Essentially, let's say I want to create a new And let me just make this slightly, actually no, let's keep this view. I'm just going to create a new record, iPhone, shelf B, and watch this field over here. As soon as I put in a transaction direction, let's say I want to put in 10 quantity, and I'm just going to use the transaction direction add, the system will now instantly add this particular, but it will fill in this value in this linked record. So that's automation number one, super straightforward. The next one that we have to create is a simple trigger of when an order, when process order is checked in the order line items table. Then we're just running a very simple script where we're taking essentially we're taking this script, we're putting our webhook in that was given to us by make, and we're creating a quick little variable here called record underscore ID, and just putting in the Airtable record ID in there dynamically. So that's that. That's the Airtable trigger automation side. Let's take a look at what's happening in Make. So this is the automation that runs in Make. Starts with a webhook. We need to copy obviously that address and paste it into our script over here. Once that happens, we are taking and updating that order line item. Let me just put myself over there. We're updating that order line item with a processing log value, basically letting the user know that we've started working on the automation. Next, we are iterating through the use locations, because at this point in the process we've basically started the transaction, and we've said that, hey, I want you to use let's say shelf A to process this order. So we're iterating through that array. Next, we're getting the actual item like so. Then we are searching for that item and location combination inside of the ledger like so. I'm limiting it to 10, but I mean technically there shouldn't be a limit, I guess. And yeah, that's the basic formula that we need to have in there. Then we're aggregating these results, and and essentially what we need to do, we need to group by location name from this module, and what we need to bring in is this final search records 30, and we need to bring in the transaction direction value, the quantity, and the location record ID, and like I said, all grouped by the location name. Next, we iterate through these results like so. We just create an iterator. Then we have to only filter through transaction direction add, and this is then summing up the total adds. Then we need to iterate through the array again of 31, this one, but this time only uses. So filter the transaction direction by the value of use, and that again sums things up. Then we have two things. First of all, we have this variable called available, which subtracts 33, which is our adds minus the uses, and gives us a value, in this case 4 minus 0 equals 4. And then finally, this is applied. Oh, sorry, I should have renamed this. So that's applied. And this sums up, this basically takes the quantity required from the order from number 4. So required 8, and then available 4. So 8 minus 4, it would have 10. I believe it had 10 or something like that. Anyway, so that basically takes quantity required minus this result over here and gives us a number. We finally aggregate everything, and what we need to bring is the array aggregator 31, the key and the array, and from there also the available figures. Next, we have two directions. So the first direction over here is where make will go next, and once it's finished doing this, it will then finally go down this path where we're basically doing the final processing complete log entry, therefore notifying the user that we're basically done with the process. So yeah, this leg over here now has the array of 42. So this array, we're sorting it by ascending by the value of the available field in ascending order. There you go. Because this array contains available, and we want that to go in ascending fashion. So what this does is essentially you're setting up the system to use up the first available. I think this transaction over here is best. Let me just delete some of these just to explain how this works. So let's delete this one. Now you see how here when we ran our first test, it used up first the 4 and then the 6. In other words, it used up the quantity in shelf B, which had 4, and then it used up shelf C, which had 6. This is literally it. I'm telling the system, use up the locations that have got the least amount of stock first, before you go into other locations that have more stock available. So hopefully that makes sense. Then I'm putting a filter over here to say that use locations. In other words, that the locations that I've selected in my order processing contain that array of locations contains the locations that that are being present in this iterator. Next, I get the stock fulfillment value basically I'm getting that record again. The reason why I'm doing that is because it will iterate things, and every single time that there is a pass, I want to see what is the latest, how much is needed during that pass. So as it's going here and it's using up 4, let's use that same example over here. So the first time it will use the shelf B with 4, and then I need the system to check again on this order to see how much is remaining, 6, in order to proceed and do the rest of its thing. So remaining to allocate, and that's literally it, not equal to 0, so it will continue the processing until it can't allocate anymore. So here we have two scenarios. The first scenario is when the remaining to allocate from here, from us getting an update on that order's remaining to allocate value, remaining to allocate is greater than what is available within that stock location. Then it will we're creating a variable called A, and we're taking everything that's available, and finally we're creating a stock ledger entry marrying we're basically creating a use direction transaction where the item is the item of the order, the location is the location of 41 of that array that goes through here. The order line item, obviously the one that is from number 4, transaction direction use, and the quantity of everything that's available. So essentially the system, if what is required is more than what's available, it will completely drain that location. It will use up every single bit of stock from that location. Now, on the opposite end, if the remaining to allocate is less than what's available, then we're taking again another variable, a, and in here we're putting the remaining to allocate. So instead of draining that full location and therefore taking up more than what we actually need, we're saying, okay, how much do what's remaining to allocate? 3 pieces. And that's it. We're basically creating that variable there. And then we're simply marrying that like we did up here. In stock ledger, we're creating that same entry, marrying item, the item record, the location record ID, the order line item ID, transaction use again, and the quantity being this variable over here. You could argue that, you know what, Alex, maybe you don't need this particular variable because, you're not really doing much. Okay, fine. You could even say the same thing for this. You could kind of put that in there instead of the variable, but I just like to use variables wherever I can. So yeah, next, as this process finishes, like I said previously, we're just pushing that final update to the log saying that we've completed the process. So yeah, now let's take a look at one final run through of the whole system, and that will be that. So let's take a look at the system one last time. Like I said, I can just now create a new order. I've got my date to fill in. I can put a item, iPhone, quantity required, let's say 4. I can use shelf B because I can see from here that I've got 10 items in there. Process the order, and while that's processing, I'm going to create yet another order for another date, again for the iPhone, and here I'm just going to say that I need 6. And again, I'm going to use shelf B. I'm going to process that order, and I'm going to create another order for the 31st. Again, iPhone. I need, let's say 10. And I can instantly see that I've got only shelf A that has got something available in it. And I'm going to use shelf A, process that. And you can instantly see how that is going to now process. And the most important thing, of course, is the fact that the system has created a very clean log of all the transactions of stock being added in different times into the same or different locations, how stock is being used, how stock is being added again, and again how stock is being used. So that's basically it. See you guys in the next one. Cheers.